Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted to be joined by Scott of SM Media. Scott has launched the Celtic Report, and we thought it would be a great idea to get you on and tell everybody that tunes into Acsom all about your own platform and your own channel, Scott, but also have a deep dive into how we are feeling this season as Celtic fans, some of your memories from the past, and anything else that takes your fancy, because that's what it's all about. It's about a state of mind. Scott, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
No, it's a pleasure, mate. I really appreciate it being on. Really good cause to cover. I'm always happy to talk about football.
This is the thing. A lot of people, when I started up the live stream, Scott, it was during the pandemic, and everything changed. That we know it did, but the kind of communication levels and the channels of communication had to change because people were, stuck in that. Can you remember like people having like quiz nights on Zoom and all that? And it came to my mind because we had this wee facility in Dalkeith at that point. It came to my mind that we could talk about Celtic every day because you're watching Sky Sports on a loop, and we could do this every day. And people would say to me, "How can you talk about Celtic for an hour every day?" And I said, "Because we do anyway." If you're a fan, like if I speak to my dad, it's 99% Celtic, 1% music, and that's it. That's the conversation. So you would do it anyway, and that's why I knew it would work. And my big kind of concern, Scott, was coming out of the pandemic, how things would change. But I think that the 12:30 Acsom Bulletin became a bit of a crux. It became something that people got used to. It was there, and they could get their wee Celtic fix, be that live, later on when they're walking the dog, on the treadmill, on their commute, on the train, whatever. And it's been phenomenal. But what I also love to see is when people set up Celtic platforms, because it's all about having a voice and a variety of opinions. What made you decide? Because I know that you've been creating content for a long time. What made you decide to have your own standalone Celtic channel?
It was basically just, as you say, like we were doing a Scottish football podcast for about 2 years, and I was noticing we had a lot of Celtic fans following, but I was giving them maybe 5 minutes of Celtic related content in a podcast a day, and there was occasionally the kind of odd article, and I was thinking, there's a platform there, there's an audience there, let's kind of lean towards that audience. So we started the Celtic Report in the summer, and it was obviously it came at the launched it just at the time where Ange was leaving. So it was like we had a lot to talk about every kind of couple of days. So there was a lot of content you could talk about, and there was a lot of people I knew who was like, I want to do like Celtic content, but I don't have the audience. I'm like, well, I can try and help you with that. And obviously with some guys come on and write for us, and they kind of do daily pieces, and always wanted to do like post-match coverage. Like I just felt as if Celtic were playing on a Saturday, it was usually we were waiting until maybe the Monday or Tuesday before we did the podcast. So we were kind of 2 days, and by then a lot of other people had spoke about it. So I was kind of thinking, right, let's have a podcast, let's put it out on a Monday, and let's kind of see where this takes us. And so far it's been great. We've got a lot of, and I think when a lot of your audience, like obviously with what I do, it's a lot of like other Scottish football stuff. So Celtic fans, if you're kind of focused on Celtic alone, a lot of it will kind of pass you by. But with the Celtic Report, we get stuff going out daily. So there is something there for everybody, like every Celtic fan every day. So that was kind of the reason for it. And I'm not on the kind of live stream platform yet. Like I do it the odd occasion, but it's something I've not pursued all the time. Just kind of time related more than anything. But it's something that, as you say, once the kind of channel, like once we kind of launched in Patreon as well, so there's a lot more kind of avenues and platforms to go out on. So it's something that, like Celtic fans, I think there's every fan of every football club schemes for content in their own club, and the more the better. That's what I say.
No, definitely. And the big thing is variety. Obviously, a lot of people became aware of Acsom during the pandemic. We've been running for quite a few years before then as a podcast, audio podcast, whereby if we had an opportunity, we would film interviews and put them on a YouTube channel. But the YouTube channel had no real content on it until the pandemic hit. And now it's about your live streams, your daily topics, your bulletins. That's all covered in that's why we called it a bulletin, in the kind of news segments. And now we're trying to create more and more of the fully produced content. Later on today, Pierre Van Hooijdonk, George Cadet and John Collins joined us on the 31st of October. for a live event in Glasgow, we got an opportunity to sit down with them and do an interview. And we filmed it, and we've never actually put it on the channel for two reasons. I've never got round to looking at the edit, which is one of them, and it's going back to that time thing. But secondly, it got to the point where I was kind of at that halfway point between October and the charity weekend, and I thought I could save this for the charity weekend and drop a bit of different content. Now, the version that you're going to get, ladies and gents, will be launched at 5 o'clock tonight. The Pierre Van Hooijdonk, George Cadet and John Collins interview. Myself and Jerry Taylor interviewed them at Don Max in Glasgow. It's not fully edited. It is not the final cut, but you know this, I just thought, let's get it out there. And if I can tweak it and tidy it up later on, brilliant. If I look at it and it's already got about 5,000 views, I'll just leave it as it is. It will be imperfect. There might be one or two wee edits that I would have put in. But you know what? It's about actually just getting the content out there this weekend. Because as you said, Scott, it's about a good cause. And what actually happened here about the weekend, before we get stuck into Celtic topics, I'll give everybody a bit of background, because every year on year, new people are introduced to the channel. They don't know 1,000,000% what you've done in the past, because there's that much content on the channel. The charity weekend, I remember getting sent a link to, it would have been the very first one, 2020. 2020 was the first one we did, and I got sent a link to the Celtic Christmas ad. And I was looking at that, thinking to myself, that's brilliant, absolutely well done. It's one of the things you kind of look forward to at Christmas time, is what they're going to do this time. But I thought the main angle has to always be at this time of year, not about who can I sell merchandise to, but how can I help someone who is unfortunately not doing too well for any number of reasons. And then in the first year, we helped a number of charities. One of them was the St. Roch's Walk and Talk initiative, which is a mental health initiative, which still to this day is active. We helped the homeless, we helped underprivileged kids, and what we tried to do at that point is split it between, it was 4 charities at the time, and everybody got about $7,000 or something around about that point. So it was life-changing to some people. If it helped somebody at Christmas, great. The year after that and the following year was focusing on St Mary's, which is obviously the birthplace of Celtic and the Carlton in Glasgow, who had hit hard times due to the pandemic and the fact that there was nobody going to the Mass and everything else, because it was all virtual. And they were in a bad way. And I was astonished to hear that when that happens, there's an option whereby the Catholic Church will give them a loan. Scott, you know, and I'd never thought about the business side of religion in such a way. It was like, right, you've got a hole in the roof. Who's going to fix it? Well, they've got to fix it themselves. They've got to find their own money, etc., etc. And I thought to myself, listen, I know there will be churches all over the country who are struggling in the same way financially, but this is the birthplace of Celtic. We've got to do something, you know. So we did raise cash for St Mary's, over 30 grand in total. To assist with, for me, you know, it's a destination that has to always be there for Celtic fans, for the community, for the parish. Absolutely, it has to. And by the way, recently I've heard that they are still, or they are in trouble again financially, and it's something we're going to have to start looking at. We were quite a way down the line with this year's. Jamie Tierney is a young 4-year-old Celtic fan who suffers from Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and there's no cure. I've met the wee boy. It would break your heart, and his family needs 60 grand a year just to treat him, to try and improve the quality or maintain the quality of his life. And they're doing that, and they're doing it in the hope, in the belief that there will be a cure at some point during these endeavours, and we are helping them, and we're going to keep helping them. So if you're able to chuck a couple of quid into the fundraising, then the link is underneath this video. The very last section of today will be a live auction, because people have been very kind in sending us Celtic items to auction off. We've got signed football, signed tops, etc. We're going to auction them off live and see if we can raise a few quid that way as well. So, Scott, if I need to disappear, it's because somebody is trying to get into the room at the moment. It is locked. Right, and you can just chat. I'll give you a subject and you can run with it until such times. But yes, I hope that we're able to help the family out. And every time we do the live events, we also raise cash during those live events as well. So I'm going to bring up a couple of these comments, and then we'll get stuck into the Celtic. AR says, my dad's chat is 99% Celtic, 1% horse racing. Fair play to the Olgin as well. It's always great to have a wee chat with your old fella, isn't it? Double denim. Loving this today. It's like having the Acsom team in the house, and you will have a good few hours remaining as well, Chris, on that. So thanks very much for joining us. Celtic, what's the main topics that the audience wants to talk about? It's about Brendan coming back. Ange's gone. A few top players have left. There was quite a bit of business done in the summer window. We get knocked out the Viaplay Cup. There's a different style of play. Some of the new signings have bedded in. Some of them apparently are going to be leaving in January. Yeah. The topsy-turvy European campaign, yet we're still top of the league. I've called it a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde campaign. You've seen the two sides of Celtic, Scott. You have. I mean, domestically and in Europe, you've seen some very good performances, but you've also seen the other side of that, not so good. Talk me through the kind of emotional side of that, looking at that as a football fan and saying, well, it's not as free-flowing, I don't think, as it was in season 2 under Ange.
It is, and there's a difference in terms of, look, when Brendan was appointed, I think a lot of people were, this seems to be a continuity kind of level appointment. It's not too different from Ange. It's obviously somebody that's been there before, knows the club, knows some of the players, but there is a difference, and we see where Ange's went down south. Ange's went down south and plays against Man City the same way he'll play against Livingston up in Scotland. He's just going to do what he does. But with Brendan, I think there's a lot of the players that were there under Ange that can I maybe struggle to adapt a wee bit now. There's still, as you say, the performances are still some excellent performances. I go to Tynecastle, where I thought Celtic were excellent. The Hibs game a couple of weeks ago, I really was impressed with Celtic that day. And you look at Europe, we'll get into Europe, I would imagine it as a kind of overall package. But performance-wise, I would say 4 out of the 6 games Celtic played well in large parts of them. I would say only maybe with the exception of Feyenoord away. I thought they were okay up to a point up until the red card, but I thought Atletico away, they were maybe a bit off it. But you look at the 3 home games, and I thought Celtic played pretty well. Just obviously results didn't go the right way. But I would say overall, there's disappointments in there. There's a lot to touch on, because I think there's a lot of things that are kind of flying under the radar. But I would say overall, if you were to say to a Celtic fan, you would win at Ibrox, you would win at Pittodrie, you would win at Tynecastle in the first round of games, I think they would have bit your hand off, to be honest. And I think because of the way the fixtures are going, like the next few weeks are massive, as say 4 games before the end of the year, and win all those 4 games, which I think Celtic are capable of doing, I think they'll be fine. I think they'll be the kind of fears and the worries in recent weeks will be absolutely kind of over. And as you say, not having European football after Christmas, it means focusing on the league, and we know that Champions League place is so important for next season. Win the league, you're in that. So I would say overall, there's a lot of things to look at and kind of assess. But overall, I think Celtic fans will be potentially happy with how European wise. I think there's big questions to ask, but I would say overall, just the results, some difficult ones in there. But I would say mostly being top of the league at this stage, after the difficult round of fixtures, I would say I think a lot of Celtic fans would have took that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's a sense, and people disagree with me on this, which is what it's all about. There's a sense with me, Scott, that Rodgers has been almost assessing his squad on the job. So I know that he comes in 2 weeks after Ange Postecoglou leaves for Spurs. Ange leaves 3 days after the Scottish Cup final and the treble's wrapped up. And it was the will he, won't he and all that. And I remember speaking about it on the day of the Scottish Cup. And I had been told that Brendan Rodgers would be coming up for the game. And he'd obviously appeared at a game previously. And I don't know for sure, but I just thought to myself, is he testing the water here? Does he think that I'm going to go up to a Celtic game? It's obviously going to become highlighted that I'm there because of the nature of his departure. I'm just going to test the water to see if I get booed. Yeah, I thought, as cute as that. And then when the Ange rumours started to circulate, and then we all then become body language experts, Scott. We're looking at every nuance. Oh, right, because he's saying this on the pitch, or because he's not doing that, he's going to leave. And he did leave, and he did. And it did it feel like the end of an era? I'm not sure. Maybe the end of a chapter rather than maybe the
I
end
would
of
say
an era with Ange. But he had such a distinctive style. And some of the players, and probably this is with hindsight, I've got to admit, some of the players were so suited to that style that their performances were excellent under Ange. And I think what we've seen now is guys that you could absolutely, rely on week after week after week. I've kind of struggled to play a different style, I would even say a different shape to a degree. We use our wingers differently. We use our fullbacks differently. We even use Joe Hart differently than we did under Ange Postecoglou. Some things have remained the same. And we'll get into the whole Lagerbielke scenario because I find it interesting that recruitment back in the day, I mean, I started going to the games, physically going to the games in 87, first season ticket 94. And there was for a long time, I would say even autonomy as a Celtic manager and most football club management when it came to players. And it seems obvious, but it's not so obvious now, Scott. It seems obvious if you're the manager, you pick the players that you want, you coach them, you develop them, you buy them, you sell them. It's not like that in modern football now. And I think slowly but surely we've begun to accept that it's not like that. But when you bring in a £3 million centre-half who some might say on paper that he wasn't suitable for Celtic because of his style. The data tells you that, he's far more suited at breaking the lines, long-range passing, doesn't have a great amount of pace, etc. Might not suit us. And he gets played when we really need to play him. I think he played 5 games in the league. You could kind of like bookend his Celtic career with the sending off against Feyenoord in match day 1 in the Champions League. And then the scoring of the winning goal and the fans gone wild and people running onto the pitch, lager. And we hear from a brilliant source yesterday, Stephen McGowan. And he's a phenomenal source, right? I know people will boo and hiss anytime you mention the mainstream media. Stephen McGowan is phenomenal at his job. And by the way, he's not fed. A lot of people think, he's spoon-fed stories. He's not. He's just a bloody good journalist doing his job well. And there's a suggestion that we might sell Lagerbielke in January, Scott. What does it say about this autonomy that I'm talking about, the recruitment, and then you start to worry about Brendan not rating the players he's been presented with? That's a concern, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing as well. Like for 2 years under Ange, we very rarely spoke about recruitment being a concern. Now before that, we obviously had the Barcasses of the world and things like that. So there was a lot of anger to point towards what's going on with recruitment. But under 2 years, and I say this to everybody, you could count in one hand the amount of bad signings that Ange made. Realistically, the recruitment was phenomenal, and the recruitment was obviously players that Ange had in mind for his system. Now you said there about Brendan coming back. Now we all remember Brendan 4 or 5 years ago saying, "If I don't get the players I want," and we know famously he didn't get a couple of players that won who went on and been very good down south, he would be terminado. So I was apprehensive of that when I heard Brendan was coming back, because I'm thinking if he has to have seen something different in terms of recruitment, because that was the big concern that he probably had with his time up here the first spell. Now he did get money to spend, and he did spend it well enough, I would say. But Ange's record in transfers was brilliant. So he must have been persuaded something. The famous there's obviously the rumour that Desmond went to see him and said, here's what we're going to do. Here's the change for the last time you were here. So has that looked the same from what he's been told? I don't know, because I'm seeing a lot of the same things that you saw maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where players are coming in, project players, you would say, with the exception of 1 or 2, and I don't see where they fit Brendan's system. Now, Lagerbielke is an example of that. Lagerbielke, I think was okay. And as you say, the red card, I thought he did well at Ibrox, but he's not what Celtic think. He's not what Celtic need in terms of Celtic have a style of play, and that's one of the reasons I think Scales has went in and done so well, is because he is naturally a left-sided defender that Celtic didn't. Celtic probably should have got in the summer. But I mean, Celtic don't have that. So he went in there, complemented Carter Vickers really well, whereas I'm not sure the two that came in really have. So that is the reason. What does it say when you sign a player for $3 million, he's 22 years of age, and he's already been told he can go? That to me, there's something that worries me. Is it an attitude thing? Is it? I just don't. He just doesn't fancy him, which is fair because a lot of managers go in and sign a player, and 6 months we'll take a look at them. But can you say that he's been given a proper chance to really cement himself in that side? I mean, I think he's only played 7 games. I mean, he's not been terrible, but does Brendan just like, nah, don't fancy him, want him out, want somebody else in? But when you're spending £3 million on somebody, can you get that back in 6 months? That's a tough one.
Well, we've lost. The thing is, Scott, we always give the club credit when you bring in a player. Let's use Jeremy Frimpong, a fairly recent example of it. You bring in a player and you pay a development fee for him. I think it was rising to maybe a couple of £1 million with regards to what Man City eventually got for Frimpong. And we end up selling him for over £10 million. £11.5 million with a sell-on and all the rest of it. And I know we do that well as a football club. It's part of the strategy. It's actually been outlined in the most recent financial results by the chairman, saying that there's 2 types of player we buy. We buy the player that we know we can develop and then sell when they're at their optimum value. And there's the other one who can affect the team instantly to continue with the success. And the problem I've got is when you lose 3 starters, as we did, 1 to retirement and Moy, Jota obviously and Starfelt, when you lose 3 starters and there's no obvious starters coming in. Now I know Palmer's done well. Palmer has done well. I think he's inconsistent. He's not there yet. I think he can get there as a Celtic player, especially under someone like Brendan Rodgers. The rest of them, though, the jury's out. The jury's out. And if you bring 9 players in, I said it last week, I think it was, on the back of a treble-winning season, it can actually work against you. So we talk about the size of the squad, Scott. You know, Brendan Rodgers wants 25. It was actually backed up yesterday by John Kennedy. So Brendan Rodgers wants 25 as a first-team squad. 17 of them are going to be playing regularly and being rotated. The rest of them are there for backup, fringe players. Maybe a couple of guys coming through the ranks. You know, Mitchell Frame coming on the other night. Phenomenal for the young kid, 17 years of age. I know Rocco Vata has not featured this season, surprisingly. But there's a few kids who'll be part of that, you know, the fringe mentality. If you've got, and as we currently do have, 32 players, you're going to have the vast majority of them are not playing, you know, regular football. So you've got your 15, 16 guys that are playing a lot of games, and the rest of them are not. You've then got a whole load of players coming back, some in January, some in the summer, who are out on loan. They're still Celtic players that are coming back into the squad. It's bloated. It's not about having a dig wherever necessary at Celtic or the board, but it's bad squad management. And then, as you were saying there, if the player that is cost £3 million in Lagerbielt's case or £5 million in Barkas and Yeti's case, and it's not been a massive success, it's then difficult to make your money back. I mean, we ended up having to tear up Barkas's contract. And a Yeti nominal fee, 500 grand or something like that.
500 grand, yeah.
Best part of £10 million in the tubes. And you think to yourself what you could do with that. And again, I always caveat this type of comment by saying, I know it's not an exact science. There are going to be some signings that don't work, but there's too many of them for me. And Lagerbielt's an interesting example because I'm just off a show where I was saying to Kev Graham this morning, he's come in, he's not played a great deal of football, but he's not, other than a red card, his performances have been fine. You know, so I'm thinking if you look at the data and you look at his performances, he's maybe not even got enough data actually, because Alan Morrison tells me it's 900 minutes he works with. Don't think he's got that yet for Celtic. He's broken into the Swedish national team, scored a goal at international level. He's played at the Champions League, scored a winner. He's been part of the biggest game in Scottish football and been on the winning side against Rangers. So are you able to do decent business and sell them on? You're certainly not going to make a profit. Will you get your money back? That's questionable. But what happens as well is it creates a situation where I look at that and think, well, has he been a happy player? Well, he's not playing, so no, he hasn't. How many other unhappy players have you got in the squad, Scott? Before you know it, if you've got 9 or 10, that can be a problem.
Of course it can. Of course it can. And that's, we look at kind of Celtic squad, and it is a treble winning squad, and there's a lot of players there that were there last season that played big parts, but the players that come in, I mean, I was really excited about the signing of Odin Holm. Still think he's got a lot to come on to. I really like the potential in that signing, and I think he's been fine. You can tell he's good on the ball. You can tell he's got a good passing range. But the one thing, and Brendan Rodgers has been clear on this, is that concerns him's physicality. Now, you only get better playing games, and is he able to break into that midfield? Now he's probably going to get a chance because they're a bit light in there at the moment, but you could say that about every single signing. I mean, Tellio, I was excited about him. Hasn't really had a sniff, to be honest. Obviously been injured. The two South Koreans are signings that baffled me at the time, and they still baffle me. And kind of the other ones, Palma, you're right. I think Palma and Navrojki are the only two players you could look at and go, right, they're guaranteed starters. They're going to get in. But it's because Starfelt was sold, Jota was sold. Now, I think Jota is a massive, massive miss. I just think the link up he had with Kyogo, the flair he brings to the side, even Palma, who I think is carrying a lot of the creativity himself, because I don't think there's much on either side. I don't think Mikey Johnson should be an option in 2023. I think that speaks to bad recruitment, that a guy who was totally out of the picture last year is now starting, I think. And obviously injuries are a part to play in that. But Maeda is potentially coming back today. You would be over surprised if Maeda comes straight back in, because there is nobody else in that position. Now, that obviously says that squad depth hasn't been managed well, where I thought last year it was a massive plus. I think it was a big reason Celtic were able to do what they did. And it's all about, you sell players, fair enough. Ange sold Giacomakis and Juranovic, but we knew for a while they were going to be leaving. He had the replacements lined up before they were even out the door. Famously, he plays Juranovic at left back to bring Johnson in. So that's good squad management, whereas obviously Jota left during the kind of management. There was no manager there. But if Ange was there, Jota wouldn't have been out the door without a suitable replacement in. And that to me is the worry. That to me is the big difference I'm seeing is that, say for example, at some, probably O'Reilly, you would imagine is the next big sale. Will Celtic get his replacement in before he's allowed to leave? The way it looks, probably not. I mean, they've not really replaced Starfelt in terms of his physicality, in terms of how good he is in the air. Navrojki, I think, has been fine as well, but just him, he's not the same as Starfelt, in my opinion. And that, you have to replace these players. You have to bring players in who are either going to make a difference to a squad or replace who was there originally. And I just don't see that. And I think, the squad's bloated. The squad's way too big. There's a lot of guys on high wages that you really need to decide what you're going to do, like McCarthy as well. Yeah. The goalkeeping situations, I think, is a big problem, because I think that's one of the reasons that you're going to see Joe Hart make a lot of mistakes. There's nobody there. Like, he doesn't obviously fancy Seagrass. Scott Bain's not good enough to be a Celtic number one. And it's the same with left back. Greg Taylor, Bernabe's been he's near enough in Siberia. He's that far out the picture. Do you know what I mean? So if you are Greg Taylor and nobody's pushing you for your place, you're going to get comfortable in your position, and that means mistakes. So there isn't that squad depth that was there last season. Haksabanovic been out and loan. Was he good enough to start? I'm not sure, but get your money back on him. Why is he out on loan? He would probably be starting the now. So there's a lot of things going on with squad depth that I'm just unsure about. Vata being another one. Rocco Vata, I've watched the B team a lot. I think Rocco Vata is a sensational player, but he obviously is looking at his situation and going, if I can't get into this Celtic side, what's the point of me being here? You know what I mean?
He's too good to get to that point.
Play for the B. He's too good to play for the B team, and it's the same. The boy Frame. I thought the boy Frame was brilliant all night, and I know a couple of members of his family, and they've been very high on him for years. And the reports coming out, the Celtic youth team are very high. This kid's going to go quite far, and he'll be looking at that position at left back and going, Greg Taylor's in front of me here. He's not setting the world alight. I could take his place, and that it might motivate Greg Taylor, so it might be a benefit to him, but. You need to look at the youth team. That's what the B team was for. And I just right now think there's a lot of worries I would have about who's been brought in, why have they been brought in, are they going to benefit Celtic in the long run? Because injuries happen, we know that. Hatate's a big miss. I think Hatate's probably the biggest miss of them all. But
Agreed.
Abada was out of the. Abada wasn't starting last season. Now he's the kind of number one option. You would probably say, I like Abada. I really like Abada, but why? How now is he not then? Because Jota's left, he then pushes up. You need to get somebody in to replace Jota. I think Palmer can be that player, but he's still 22. You can see he's raw. You can see he's a lot of problems with consistency. But that all wingers have that. But I just think right now, Celtic's depth in terms of what it was like last season is just taking a massive dive, despite bringing 9 players in, and that just doesn't sit well with me.
No, especially when in a game where you're trying to do that in-game management and you want to have that strength on the bench to change things or keep the tempo at a level as it used to be with Ange. And the quality seemed to be there. You're now looking at it, and it's an interesting point you make about Mikey Johnson, because we signed 3 wingers in the summer. Yeah, Brendan Rodgers is looking internally and saying, Mikey Johnson is my best option. And he's thought that over the last few weeks. Mitchell Frame, left back at the club, 17 years of age. We've got a £3.75 million Argentinian. And the gaffer's saying, well, I'm looking internally, and the guy that's already here that came through the ranks, as with Mikey Johnson, is better than the guys that we've spent money on. Therefore, he's going to be the backup. And the other example, of course, is Liam Scales, one of the success stories of the season, when you consider that about a year ago he was playing for an Aberdeen team that was getting papped out of the cup by Darvel, and then now he's winning Champions League Man of the Match awards, Player of the Match awards. Again, someone from within. We've signed a number of centre-halves whilst Liam Scales has been at the club, Kobayashi being one of them, Navrosky, like you mentioned, Lagerbielke, yet the best option, or Stephen Welsh. That's another example of that. Stephen Welsh is the best option the other night to start, and he's from within. So Rodgers is stressed that time and time again, but what it says for me about the recruitment is that the guys we have brought in the centre-half position, left back, on the wing, have not been good enough. And that's a huge concern, because we think back, not really with green-tinted specs, but we think back on the Ange Postecoglou recruitment and think it was sensational. It tailed off. The quality tailed off after season 1. There were some players who came in. I know that, officially Carter Vickers and Jota were season 2 players permanently, but obviously they'd been at the club. But more often than not, we brought guys in who have not contributed enough in season 2 under Ange. Alistair Johnson being an exception. I think can still be a Celtic player. I do. I think he's shown enough that he's developing and he can still play a part. But there's been far too many who haven't. And that's a frustration for me. And I think Rodgers, it's a frustration for him, because one of the things, Scott, that he mentioned was the recruitment structure. He was quite happy with the infrastructure when he joined. He spoke about it. One of the main reasons he's come back. Another thing he's spoken about just last week, we asked him, Rabani, is another reason was that he wanted to progress in Europe. He's mentioned it again. He's reiterated it. And you don't want the frustrations to bed in. How big a January transfer window is this for Celtic in that respect, to obviously fill the gaps that we need to fill with the real quality that Brendan's spoken about, but also to keep him happy? Because the word terminado, every time I hear it, you think to yourself, you think back to those dark days where you're thinking, surely he's not unhappy, surely he's not going to leave. And he did. And it's only with hindsight, once you remove the emotion away from it, that you can say, right, I can actually see that from 2 sides here now. He's been presented with guys he didn't want. Marion Sved was probably the final straw. And you don't want to go down that route again. How important is January for us?
Huge, because you have these glaring gaps to fill. Like, I think a goalkeeper and a left back are 2 massive positions, but you're potentially going into January with no strikers because of this Asian Cup. So you need to bring somebody in now. I've been on the record about saying there's 2 things that Celtic and Rangers to a degree need to look at: is how are clubs of a similar level in Europe operating? What are they doing now? They're doing 2 things. Well, they're spending big. They're front loading. Celtic front loaded under Ange for the first season, and you would argue with Jota got their money back almost straight away. But they managed to get like a load of assets tied up, and Kyogo's obviously tied up. Kyogo, I think, is a player who's been off form, but I think there's excuses there. You need to get you need to look ahead already to next season, because Europe is the big problem, I think, because you're going into a group where I don't think Feyenoord, Atletico and Lazio was as tough a group as people said. I thought it was solid performances. The games were quite tight in most cases, so if luck had went the way, it could have been a different outcome. But in terms of getting that level of player, the clubs that are kind of like Belgium, the kind of champions of Belgium, the champions of Norway, kind of Austria, those kind of similar levels in terms of Celtic, in terms of budgets and things like that, they're spending big money, and they're spending big money in their own leagues. Now, the big argument is there a lot of players in Scotland who are capable of being Celtic first teamers? Maybe not the now, but in the past couple of years, we've seen Hickey go to Italy really kick on. We've seen Ferguson kick on, going to Italy. Doidge been another one. There's a lot of players who Celtic have missed the boat on. Now, Miovski, obviously, there's a lot of chat that Celtic seem to be eyeing him up. You can understand why. Is he going to come in and make a difference? Yes, because he's proven in the league. But you need to spend big. You need to... Now, you don't just throw £7 million at a player and hope it works. You need to do a bit of digging and find out, is he worth what they're quoting? If he is, then let's pay the money. It's worked in the past that Jota paid the money because they knew it was a good asset. Carter Vickers is another one. Edward, you could see the potential there. So, but you have to look at players from out west who are firing in similar level leagues and go, right, he could really contribute here. I think striker's probably the biggest position, apart from striker, goalkeeper, left back, I would say, are the three glaring holes. Once wingers come back from injury, I think that position is relatively okay. Maybe a kind of similar type of player to Jota, but are they going to back Brendan the way that A, they need to, and B, he expects them to? Because he's been very vocal, probably as vocal as he's ever been about this squad needs quality. Now, that's not... Brendan Rodgers isn't one for really being vocal like that. Now, he'll say if something's bugging him, like he said, obviously, 2 weeks ago against St Johnstone, that was as poor a 45 minutes as I've seen, and it obviously worked for 135 minutes because they were exceptional second half against St Johnstone, brilliant against Hibs, and then Kilmarnock kind of fell off in the second half. But the way that he's coming out and saying, this is what I need, the board have to listen to that, because they've been down this road with Brendan already, and it's mostly the same guys. Lawwell was there, and you have to look at Europe and think, if we can invest, if we can... Copenhagen qualified for the last 16, so Celtic can't. Do you know what I mean? So there's ways to do it. I think Copenhagen are the only team out the kind of top 7 leagues, as it were, like Portugal and Netherlands and the Big Five, who qualify for the last 16. Celtic have probably a better squad than Copenhagen, better first team than Copenhagen. So Celtic can do it. Celtic had a decent group and just came up short in those big moments. But I think you need to look at that squad and go, right, we need a better level of player. We need a better adjustment in terms of what we want to do in big game. And domestically, Celtic are fine. I think Celtic will win the league, even though Rangers are better than they were a few months ago. Celtic will win the league because they've got a far better overall squad. Rangers' squad isn't good enough to win a league, in my opinion. But Celtic need to look at Europe and go, right, this is our next level. This is where we need to look at this. Spend big, and it works. If you know as well, if you sign a player for £7 million and he's a revelation at Celtic, you make your money, you double your money instantly, because Celtic have a great record in terms of bringing players through. I look at kind of where Celtic are going now in markets. Celtic are going into really good markets. They're going to Greece, they're going to Norway, Sweden. You can pick up brilliant players in that market, but you've got to pick the right player. You've got to pick the right type of quality. Is it more about getting a 22-year-old who might be good in a couple of years, or do you go and get a 25, 26-year-old who's really good just now, who's available for decent value and can really make an impact just now? I think that's the kind of double-edged sword, but Europe has to be the focus. It has to be the priority in the next 6 months. You have to look at January. You have to view January with a view to the summer of We need a couple of players in, top quality players, and we'll try and get another couple in the summer, and we might have to have another sale, like another big sale. I'll be very surprised if O'Reilly's there in the summer. I think there's a lot of chat in England about him, and I can understand it. He's been superb. He's kicked on to a massive level this season. He is going to be a superstar in England. Like I really do believe that. But if O'Reilly was to go next summer, you get somebody in. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to pay. I mean, O'Reilly only costs about $1.5 million.
Yeah.
You can pick up players like that from England. England's a good market as well. Like you can pick up really good players in that market. It's just about finding the right ones. And if they cost more than what you're willing to pay, then you have to look at the positives and go, is this worth the risk? If it's not, then we move on. But I've just found that a lot recently, like the summer, hearing a lot of players who Celtic were looking at, and then it just completely changed. And I'm like, well, they're obviously looking at that level of player. So why are they not then just going to the next step and making big bids? And I just don't know. But in terms of quality, I think Celtic need at least two or three in January, and then assess the squad in the summer. If a sale happens, then it's a different story. But you need to look at, can we get to this next level in Europe? Because Celtic are going out too easy. That's my kind of overall conclusion.
Yeah, picking up on a few things. I always remember back in the 90s, Tommy Burns used to speak about Ajax. He always used Ajax as an example back then about how we could develop players, and even then we were doing things differently in terms of recruitment, because we started dipping into markets that we had not been focusing on. And players like Pierre van Hooijdonk, George Cadet, Paulo Di Canio, we were not signing guys like that prior to Tommy Burns' time at the club. There was a few Polish players in the 80s, and Jakanowski and Duvcek. But Rudi Vata came in as well, the Albanian, but we didn't have a lot of overseas players, and we completely changed tact on it. And by the way, when you think about some of the superstars we've had by dipping into other markets, you're glad we did. Henrik Larsson, Virgil van Dijk, Nakamura, there's loads of them, some of the guys that are in the current squad. But you pointed out something earlier, Scott, that I want to talk to you about, and that is the talent. We spoke about the talent from within at Celtic. What about the talent from within Scottish football? Because you've quite rightly said that guys like Hickey have proved that they can take that step up. And I always mention this as well, because when I'm talking about people who are in the game, they say that often these guys need to move away from Scotland to become that player. And Hickey needed that move away from Scotland to be able to go to England, etc. What's holding Celtic back from doing more business from within Scottish football? I mean, I think we've got a player in David Turnbull, for example, who, when we signed him, if you were to say, going out and sign the most promising Scottish footballer, he'd have been your man. He'd have been on the top of most people's list, right? So they're out there. And by the way, he's a player I do rate. Not sure it's going to work for him under Brendan Rodgers. But there's been a few, and you're saying the discussions about Lewis Ferguson were had on a Celtic state of mind. We spoke about Doig at left back for Hibs. We knew the talent was there. Hickey, we discussed it on a Celtic state of mind when he was leaving Hearts. Why? Why don't we do it more often, do you think? Why don't we sign the Scottish talent?
It's tough, because I think in the past kind of 10, 15 years, I think both sides have really struggled to look at the Scottish market. I mean, usually Celtic or Rangers would go and sign the best Scottish talent, and they haven't done it in a long time. Like, I'm looking at even guys like Ulrich Larsson, who's absolute standouts for Hibs. Celtic went and signed them. Do you know what I mean? Then there's a lot of players, David Fernandez, players that didn't go on and work. There's a lot of Scott Brown being another one. Derek Ryan didn't work, but they go and Celtic used to go and sign the best players. Now, is the level of player in those days better than it is now? Probably yes, but Bojan Miovski, I think, is a really good talent. Now, I think there's a big difference I think a lot of Scottish clubs, Scottish clubs are quite handy with their pennies as it is, but they know Celtic have money, so they're going to give them this quota that's way out of potentially what the guy's worth. Now, there was chat that if Miovski was to come in, he would be a higher fee than what Celtic paid Hibs for Scott Brown. Would Celtic look at that and go, right, we're going to pay at least £4.5 million for a striker from Aberdeen, whereas we could go to the continent and pick up a striker who's got a similar goal record for £2 million? But has that striker got the record in Scotland to go, right, that's a better investment? That's the kind of thing you're working with. Now, I just don't know if Miovski's going to be that worth that type of money, because yes, it might work, but it might not. Stokes, Griffiths, all these guys, they were proven in the league and they go on and be really good successes for Celtic. But there's also a lot of other examples where going to the continent's better. It's just if you're willing to pay the inflated fees. Is Bojan Miovski, are Aberdeen going to sell Bojan Miovski to a side from England for £5 million? I'm not massively sure. I think there's a bit of an inflation in terms of Celtic and Rangers as well, because I don't think Rangers have went into the Scottish market in a long time. Whether it is just that, whether it is just the price is too high, whether it is they're okay at that level, can they make the step up? Now, we've seen it in the past, but we've also seen failures. It's the same way the goalkeeping situation. Does Celtic want to spend £5 million and potentially have another goalkeeper there who they have to let go in 2 years for nothing because nobody will take him? That's the thing. It's just that, but that's what gambling and recruitment's about. You have to make those big decisions. You have to make those big steps. I think Miovski would be good at Celtic. Would he be worth £5 million? I'm not sure. So I can see why the concern is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pricing you at the market. It was similar when we were interested in Scott McKenna as well, because the transfer fee that we were being quoted at that time seemed to escalate, because why would you sell to one of your big rivals? But yeah, I do think that we definitely do have the talent in Scottish football, and I think also that's exemplified by the job that Stevie Clarke's been doing with the national team. It's great to see. I mean, because what happened for me anyway, Scott, I mean, I used to love the World Cups and the Euros, and it always seemed, you took it for granted, I guess, that Scotland were there. And you would watch Scotland, and I would always watch Ireland, and they were the two teams that I would support. And I ended up watching Ireland longer in all the tournaments because Scotland got papped out in the first round. But it was great to be there, and my uncles and my cousins, and we would go to the finals, and it was, as I say, it was normal. It was normalised. And then we've gone through this process of a generation not seeing their country, on the top platform. World Cups and European Championships. And I think there's been a real detrimental effect on a generation of football fans, because, we know that where the money is, and the razzmatazz and the branding of certain leagues means that you could probably drive around your estate or go up and see kids playing football down at the park there. And very few of them will be wearing Scottish football strips. Is it a concern for you that we really don't do well enough with our product? And you can actually see English football, Barcelona, Inter Miami, all the different jerseys infiltrating a whole generation of young football fans.
Yeah, and I'm from the generation. I was born in '96, so I was 2, France '98, so I don't remember that. But like, my first tournament with Scotland was 3 years ago, and it was during a pandemic where you couldn't go, and it was like that. So this is the first kind of experience I'll have of following Scotland in a major tournament. So that's something that excites me. But it's also, when you look back, it's 26 years since Scotland were last at a tournament like that. The last Euros, I think, was a bit of a whitewash because of the circumstances. It didn't feel the same. But that's what we huge. But I agree. I'm 27, and I have felt like the Scottish football landscape is just so much different. Like, I remember hearing stories about how in depth it was back in the 90s and things like that. Like, the 90s is probably the period of time I like to look back on and like doing my articles and things like that, because it just seems such a better time for football in terms of, and everything, not just like the change in football, but we haven't, as you say, like, we haven't seen, like, I've got 3 nephews and not one of them supports. They've not got either any shot in Scottish football. They don't even really care about Scotland, to be honest. And I think that's been a disconnect between how bad Scotland have been, obviously, but you are beginning to see that now. But yeah, it's all about England. It's all about even in my day, Barcelona, Real Madrid, like they were kind of coming through. Like, I remember Beckham signing for Real Madrid, and the next thing Beckham being like the talk of the town, and everybody was walking about in a Real Madrid shirt, and we've lost that in Scotland. And I think the overall landscape of Scottish football now is just, and the media situation, the media kind of situation in Scotland has been so much different in the past 10 years. The real kind of reason that we're able to do this is that the media have kind of stopped looking at Scottish football as football kind of thing. And I know that sounds daft, but that's just kind of the way it's went now. But I think there's a wee bit of buzz coming back because Scotland are doing well internationally, but as well, I think there's so much more that can be done to get those guys back. I mean, I was a stage when I was young, I was playing football every single day, and now you don't see that. You don't see that young. It's not the same. There's a disconnect, and is that down to technology? Probably, but I don't see enough being done in terms of let's get more youngsters into football. It just seems to be a massive disconnect from what it was in the 90s and the early 2000s when I was growing up. It just seems so much different.
No, it is. It definitely is. I mean, some of it is proper old school tactics, and school football teams. Again, I took it for granted. Every school had a football team, and
Yeah.
I was astonished to find out that that's not the case any longer, and because that's where you hone your craft, and people rise to the top, and then they start getting interested a wee bit later on. But it's all about morning, noon, and night playing the game. And a friend of mine managed to get a position at a football club whereby he was a general manager, and he implemented some of these old school methods of starting to engage again with kids and get them into the football, because he had this memory of the manager and one of the star players coming to his school. The local football team came to his school and they done a presentation, they handed out goodie bags, and it was like, if any kid was at that age where they were just getting into football and their parents couldn't take them to, maybe if their dad was a Celtic fan and couldn't take them to Glasgow, maybe they could go to the local team. And he was turned on to that as a young football fan, and it stayed with him, and it was something he started implementing. So I think there's loads that can be done by the clubs. I think the media, you're right, dissatisfaction with a lot of the outlets has probably led to an alternative scene where people have thought, we can get fairly cheap tech and do something ourselves and run with that. And if it's any good, we can maybe improve it year on year, which hopefully we can do with a Celtic state of mind. And you're obviously doing it yourself on your own platform. It's great to see these things growing as well, Scott. It's an intriguing discussion to have. But on this weekend, as always happens, 4th year in a row, I'll run a wee bit late. A couple of the streams are cut short, etc. So apologies for that. What we had today already, we've had the Celtic Cross Collective. If you were up at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, you would have seen the premiere of an EP, which was a Henrik Larsson EP. A little bit different, but I liked it, and I liked it a lot. My music taste, anybody who tunes into Acsom will know my music taste isn't always mainstream, a wee bit indie, but I really did like that. And I said to Kev Graham has been contributing and a very important part of Acsom since day one. We recorded the first episode, and I keep saying this, at the kitchen table in my gaff. And I says to Kev, because there's this moment, Scott, with anything where if you put it out there, you think, oh, will anybody like it? And it's the same if you do, like a Celtic State of Mind. I never knew if anybody would be into that or any of my books or whatever. And Kev's the same with the music. But I says to him, I goes, right, you imagine some spoken word artist doing in Manchester, doing an EP on Eric Cantona and making it listenable, a wee bit indie, a wee bit punky, a wee bit rocky. You'd be all over it, and he'd be lauded as a genius. And he's done it on Henrik Larsson, and we've got some good feedback coming in. Maybe if I get the opportunity, maybe even during the game, we're going to do a Celtic v Hearts watch along today. So not just the pre-match, halftime, and post-match. We'll play a few of his tunes, just in case you went up at 7 o'clock this morning. Mm-hmm. I just made it. I've got to say, I've just made it. Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope that you can come on again to Celtic State of Mind whenever the mood fancies you. If you want to come on, You're absolutely welcome. Just before we go though, tell us, where can we find the Celtic Report? Where can we find your outlet?
So on my channel SM Media, it drops every Monday, so it'll be on that. We've obviously got the Celtic Report SM on X as it's known, and you can see us on Facebook and YouTube. If you type in SM Media, you'll come across the Celtic Report podcast. We do a lot of the player ratings. We get Celtic player ratings going up after every game, so they'll drop tomorrow. Got a post-match video, do a post-match video after every Celtic game, so that'll drop tonight. So there's content, there's daily Celtic content on the channel. So if you follow Celtic Report SM on X, you'll find us there.
That's fantastic, and thanks for all the great work that you're doing, so that Celtic fans can have even more content. Scott, thanks everybody for getting involved in the comment section. We are raising funds for Jamie Tierney will be raising funds all weekend and at all our live events, and I can see that some more funds are coming in. The link is underneath the video. We will be pushing this. The wee fella needs 60 grand a year, every year, to treat a horrible condition called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He's 4-year-old. We've got a wee video from him, actually. We're going to be playing that during the weekend as well. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved in our weekender. Jump back onto YouTube or onto the socials where you can watch it as well for our next guest, Michael Taggart. All that's left for me to say is, Scott from SM Media and the Celtic Report, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you.